most persecuted minority in the world cannot seem to catch a break from its incessant suffering, both at home on the perilous seas while fleeing and mistreatment by countries unwilling or unhappy with taking them in. The Rohingyas of Myanmar have fallen off our radars and have been sidelined even by Nobel Peace Prize-winning democracy advocates. In this edition of the debate, we'll speak about the mass exodus of Rohingyas and what is to come for these stateless people.
Tens of thousands of Rohingya Muslims, known to be the world's most persecuted minority, have been forced to flee their homes in the western Rakhine state. Over the past years, Rohingyas have fled in search of a better and safer life, as they have no legal rights in their homeland. But that dream has eventually turned into a nightmare for many. Hundreds have died on board boats due to terrible conditions, and thousands have fallen into the hands of human traffickers who take them to secret camps before using or selling them as slaves. A portion of those who eventually reach their desired destination after paying very huge sums are no better off, as they could face deportation. Many Rohingyas have encountered or witnessed physical assault and extortion for ransom money at secret camps. Some analysts accuse Myanmar of paving the way for human trafficking syndicates to run their thriving industry of modern slavery from Rakhine State.
Regarding the security services, there's been even more issues. For example, recently, The Guardian, they exposed how security forces in Myanmar have been taking money from the Rohingya Muslim refugees, and how this is an ongoing issue, that many levels of the bureaucracy are involved in this, and yet nothing's being done.
Reports have also emerged claiming that security forces in destination countries have refused to allow the trafficked Rohingyas to practice their legal rights to return home and receive compensation. Instead, they've been mostly treated as illegal immigrants, as many border guards and officials have been greatly benefiting from the practice.
It's an ongoing issue. Since 1982, the Rohingya Muslims have not been considered citizens of Myanmar, and there has been a lot of, ill intent towards the Muslims, which we have seen at the hands of Buddhist monks, which again are not openly criticized or demonized. And all it does is, most of the interviews that I've seen of Rohingya Muslims, they know that they don't have a future. All they have is move from one camp to the next and hope that they're not hurt along the way.
Analysts say the region's cross-border trade of human lives is unlikely to change unless the international community exerts pressure on Myanmar and neighboring countries to identify the main culprits and bring them to justice.
Let's now introduce our guests for this edition of the debate. We're joined from Beirut by Mr. Ibrahim Moussawi, who is a political commentator, and we're also joined live from Washington by Mr. Lawrence J. Korb, who is a foreign policy and national security analyst. Gentlemen, we appreciate both of you joining us for this program. Mr. Korb, I'd like to start with you, if I may. As a report there stated, Rohingyas are fleeing repression in Myanmar, where authorities view them as foreigners. They're denying them citizenship. They're placing restrictions on their movement, their marriages, and even economic opportunities. How do you then assess the current status of these peoples in their own country as well as abroad?
Well, I think it's horrible. I mean, they've been basically persecuted for almost 1,000 years now in Myanmar under every type of government that you have, and it basically is inhuman. It reminds us of the way that ISIL tried to go after the Yazidis when they came into Iraq. This is a horrible thing, and you would hope that in the 21st century we would have moved beyond that. Unfortunately, there's still a lot of this going on. You've got the Chinese, the way that they treat the Uyghurs, for example. And I think what has to happen is people have to continue to speak out about it, as President Obama did when he went to Myanmar this month, and Secretary Kerry did at the APEC meeting last August.
Okay, Mr. Moussawi, I'd like to get you in on this as well. And I just wanted to add this in there. President Thein Sein, the Myanmarese president, has essentially denied all allegations that Rohingyas were fleeing abuses, and he's called it a quote-unquote media exaggeration. Do you think that essentially the Myanmarese government is making conditions such that the Rohingyas have no choice but to leave?
Absolutely. We have heard a lot about massacres that have been perpetrated by Buddhist mobs. We have heard a lot about the about the persecution that has been practiced by the security authorities in Myanmar. And I do want to oppose the point of view that says that we need only to speak and to speak more, to speak out what's really happening there. Just like my colleague from Washington, I believe the American president shouldn't have visited the country in the very first place. He should have boycotted the country and the state, and they should have exercised the pressure. I believe a state like the United States of America has a lot to do in this regard. You're talking about a superpower. You're talking about a very important, influential country that could exercise embargo, that could do things that would bring those who are governing there into their senses, because what's happening there is complete, horrible, complete atrocities against the people. So what we really need to see happening, not more words coming out and not more condemnations coming out. Words will not do anything. I believe actions speak louder than words. We have to wait for the international community to take tangible, to take concrete, clear measures against the government in Myanmar. And when they talk about exaggerations in what's happening and they are not fleeing the country because of persecution, why don't they adopt a transparency policy? Why don't they allow the international communities, NGOs to come to the country and to investigate on reality? Though we know very well that they will have one simple result: massacres, persecution is going there, and nothing else.
Mr. Korb, I wanted to push you on a point that Mr. Moussawi there made as well about the United States. Now, it seems that we have a different reading of how President Obama's trip there went. A lot of Rohingya activists, and I'm getting this from a lot of activist websites who support the Rohingya peoples, did not see President Obama's trip to Myanmar in a very positive light. In fact, they said that he ignored the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum's specific call to bring up the Rohingya people more than he did, and to call for the Myanmarese government to stop what they called the genocide that is occurring. How do you respond to that then?
Well, he did speak out, and he told them publicly that they needed to respect the political and economic and human rights of this group. So again, he has spoken out about it. And he also, in the meeting with Aung San Suu Kyi, basically urged her to do more, and she, of course, did not want to, to do that. And as I mentioned, Secretary Kerry back in August, when at the APEC meeting, basically, told them that they had to stop this horrible thing where, 100,000 people have put in camps, and another 100,000 have left the country out of the 1.3 million people.
I wanted to push you on that further, Mr. Korb, if you allow me, because certainly it does not seem that after President Obama's trip to Myanmar anything has gotten better. In fact, we've just gotten news of further plundering of villages, Rohingya villages, which had already been plundered previously. So it doesn't seem to have had any effect on the leadership.
No, obviously it hasn't, and I think with their own Nobel Peace Prize winner not speaking out, that's what I think would really help if she would speak out as well, because she is from Myanmar and has stood up to the military regime, and you would hope that she would do that. But it's kind of sad that publicly recently she kept saying, well, there's a lot of bumps on the road to democracy. We have to take it slow. I would hope that she would speak out. That would have much more impact than a foreign government, I think.
And Mr. Moussawi, how do you feel about that, about the U.S. role as well as the role, of course, of Aung San Suu Kyi? As Mr. Korb there rightly said, she has been quite silent on this issue.
I'm so sorry to hear such things coming from him, also from Washington. I mean, he's saying that Secretary Kerry told and President Obama said, and I don't know. We're talking about words. I mean, is this the only thing that they can do? Is this the only thing possible for them to do? Why can't they put embargo? Why can't they exercise measures against the government there? Why can't they put sanctions against this regime that is the dictatorship there? I mean, they are only like, they have loose hand when it comes to Ukraine, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to this part of the world, but they have only words to say. when it comes to such countries that might be, I don't know, why wouldn't they do it? Of course, there are interests. We're not talking about the charity organizations when we talk about the superpowers. We know this evidently, but the United States have to live up to the words, have to live up to all the principles that they keep advocating and preaching for the whole world. And if he's saying about the head of the opposition in Myanmar to come and speak, and this will have influence and this will help, I believe if the United States of America, if the government in America, if Secretary Kerry put his fist on the table, he will be able to do more than that. I believe the regime there would be afraid if he is threatened by the government and by the Secretary of State in America. I believe time is time for actions and not for waiting for words and for opposition to say. What we are seeing is horrible. We're talking about massacres. We're talking about perpetrations. We're talking about genocide. We're talking about atrocities. And we have to wait for words to come from this secretary and from that president. I believe actions are needed at this point more than any other thing. And when we talk about actions, we don't want them to go into a war against Myanmar government. We want them to exercise measures like sanctions, to put embargoes, to isolate those, to put them on the criminal list. This is going to help, I believe, more than anything else.
Mr. Korb, I'm sure you have a response to that, but just hold on to your thoughts. I just want to take a quick time out and go to our viewer comments as posted on our various social media platforms. Let's listen to those comments and we'll be right back.
Why is America or NATO or the UN not putting any pressure on the government of Myanmar to ensure the Muslims there are protected? Oh, I see, it's not doing anything. You don't have to go to war. At least diplomatic efforts should be done urgently. May Allah punish those killing Muslims around the world and keep Rohingya Muslims safe. The Myanmar government knows the potential danger they pose, hence that's wise action. All Muslims should help the Rohingya Muslims. When the international community is silent about Rohingya community, then Muslims should do something. Myanmar is another terrorist state after Israel. If Myanmar's government refuses to adhere to the calls of the international bodies, then the UN and the EU should sanction them.
Just some of our viewer comments there as posted on this topic. As promised, I want to go now to Mr. Korb and get him to respond to what Mr. Moussawi there said. Mr. Korb, I just want to add this in there. Certainly, I don't want this to be just a U.S. bashing thing, but certainly this time, this era in Myanmar was supposed to be an era of democracy and freedom, especially after Aung San Suu Kyi won her Nobel Peace Prize, especially after she was released, etc. Things were supposed to be different, but they haven't worked out in that way. Yet, we see the Western world as a whole standing behind the Myanmarese government, at least publicly. Why is that?
Well, again, I can explain why they're doing it and not exactly defend it. It's important to keep in mind that even if the United States were to put sanctions on, we don't trade that much with Myanmar. It's got to be the countries in the region, China, India, for example, Pakistan. These countries have also got to take action, and it should come through something like APEC, which would get all of the countries there. If the United States were to get out front, then people would accuse us again of acting unilaterally. And I agree. I mean, for example, before President Obama went over there, there was a wonderful article in the New York Times that talked about how bad these things were. I think most people weren't paying attention to it. Everybody was focusing on, for example, what's happening in the Middle East with ISIL. But again, I would think, similarly, the Pope is in Turkey now complaining about the way Christians have been treated in many parts of the Middle East. So yeah, people need to speak out about this. On the other hand, and again, I'm trying to explain it here, not defend it, Myanmar has made some progress since they got rid of the military dictatorship and they let our Nobel Peace Prize winner out of jail. So they have made some progress, but you're quite right. They have not dealt with this the way they should, and the world should be appalled about this.
Mr. Moussawi, to be fair, a lot of Rohingya activists are also quite disappointed with the way that the Middle Eastern countries have responded as well. Many, are very critical of the OIC, for example, or many Muslim bodies, or and how they've responded. Many of their words, of course, condemned what's happening to the Rohingya people, but there hasn't been a lot of action even from the Muslim world. How do you feel about that?
Well, let me first praise, I'm not here just to make praises, but let me praise, Press TV for opening this session and for giving the opportunity to talk about the Rohingya Muslims and the persecution they are under from the government. I'm sorry to say, and this is very shameful for many Arab and Islamic countries, what's really happening there, that they are not doing anything. It's when we say shame on the United States because it's superpower, because they can do something about it, this does not mean that we are not responsible. The responsibility is being shared by many different parties, by many different countries and governments that should do something about it. But as you know, the whole region is being plagued by a lot of massacres. He was talking, our colleague from Washington was saying something about the Christians in Turkey and how they are treated. I want to remind him about the Christians in Bethlehem, in Palestine, occupied Palestine, how their numbers has diminished because of the Israeli persecution. And Israel is the #1 ally to the United States of America, so they can do something about it. So it's not a matter of only like the United States. I believe a lot of countries have responsibility and something should be done there. But we all know, thanks to the United States of America, the whole region is in chaos now. And many are tackling their own affairs rather than looking into what's happening in what they consider a distant place like Myanmar.
And Mr. Korb, I want to get your response to that, of course. And secondly, I want to add this on. The Rohingya people have been called numerous times by the UN the most persecuted minority in the world. And, when you have the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum coming out, that's a pretty big deal as well. They even held an exhibition last year. I was going through some of those pictures. So if an institution that important about an event that is that important, especially for the American people as well, of course, in their minds, then why haven't we seen more action from the Western world, not just the United States, but the Western world as a whole?
Yeah, I think, again, the problem is that they're focused on so many other problems right now. For example, we've talked about, the situation in the Middle East, the problems with China and the East and South China Sea, the nuclear negotiations, with Iran. All of these problems are getting focused. Boko Haram in Nigeria, what they have done, in the name of, Allah to all of those girls. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems around the world, and the international community needs to focus on them. With my colleague, I'm glad that you brought this up, and I was glad that the New York Times wrote about it, and the Holocaust Museum. Hopefully they get people to act, but if you ask me why they're not, there's so many other things going on that people are trying to deal with.
Mr. Korb, a lot of people say this, that the reason that Myanmar is being opened up to by the Western world is because it has a lot to offer the Western world in the way of resources and minerals. And essentially, the rights of people are being sacrificed for those reasons. How do you respond to that accusation?
Well, again, I can speak for the United States. We don't have that much trade. We're becoming more and more energy independent. We've got a surplus trade. Our economy is doing better than other countries. So it would not be for, an economic reason that if we cut off trade with them, it would have a harmful impact on our economy. I think this is a human rights issue, not an economic issue.
Mr. Moussawi, how do you feel about the economy issue? Because I have read quite a bit of criticism in that regard, that this is about the minerals and resources of the country being sacrificed, of course, and being used, that is, at the sacrifice of rights.
Well, we can write volumes about the history record of the United States and the Western world when it comes to dictatorships. I believe they will not do anything, actually. Not the United States, not the Western world. All these boasting democracy countries, they are not going to do anything about dictatorships and totalitarian regimes. We know very well they have the best of relations with dictatorships all over the world, especially those governments or countries that are wealthy with resources, because what they care for, not the human rights or the democracy issues and whatever. They only care for the welfare of their own pockets and their own interests There is a whole record of inconsistency, of double standards. When he says about Myanmar, they don't have that economic relations. What about Israel? They have the best relations with Israel, and Israel is persecuting the Palestinians. In Gaza, you have 1,500,000 under siege. The least of human rights are being breached there, and they are violating everything there. Why don't the Americans do anything against it? Also, we have Gulf countries that are dictatorships. I mean, you have dictatorships in the Gulf countries, and they have excellent relations with them. They persecute minorities in their own countries. They don't respect all the codes of the United Nations and whatever. So the United States and the West, they are not in a position to say that they don't have like economic relations or whatever. In the very basic principles, they only care for their own interests. There are certain instances where they have raised their voice against, like in human things. When it comes, it boils down to their own political interest. This is the only thing I can say.
Mr. Korb, I want to give you a chance to respond then. We have about a minute left. Go ahead.
There's no doubt that throughout history, nations have permanent interest. As the British scholar said at the Versailles conference, Sir Harold Nicholson, nations have permanent friends or enemies. They don't have permanent interests. You take a look, for example, at the situation in Syria. You've got countries that were working with the United States in Iraq have a different view of Syria. You've got the Turks have their own interests, and we're trying to get them to work together with us. So yeah, this is what happens, and unfortunately, sometimes issues like this, while it's certainly important, you're talking about 1.3 million people, should get more attention. Many times they don't.
Okay, well, we have to leave it there as a final thought, but we do appreciate both of you speaking to us today. That was Mr. Lawrence J. Korb, Foreign Policy and National Security Analyst, who is speaking to us live from Washington. And we were also joined by Mr. Ibrahim Moussawi, who is a political commentator, and he had been speaking to us live from Beirut. And of course, viewers, we do appreciate you joining us as well, and of course, for your comments as well as posted on our social media platforms. Till next time, good night.